Yeah. All right. We are recording now. Give me one moment and we'll queue up the presentation.
Cashback are the things you care about most.
All right. Can you guys see the screen? I believe so. Thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, cool. Perfect. Well, yeah, like I said, thank you all for jumping on the call this evening. We are recording and we'll have this uploaded to YouTube and we'll drop it in the Discord. But y'all know who I am. But on the call, we've also got Coach Scott Ellis, Coach Whitley Atkins, and of course, Coach Pablo Gomez, who really told me he wanted to do this presentation, just given where he came from as a student, as an athlete, and now as a professional athlete and coach. I think he, more than anyone, has the skill set and intangibles to really talk on this really eloquently. But yeah, I'll just preface this by saying we live in a society in an age of overindulgence. You know, there's almost a potency of highly rewarding stimuli, and that of course includes Instagram, Amazon, and of course training. You know, I think we're often rewarded via social media for just drilling ourselves week after week and looking sexy on Instagram because it looks good, and we want likes because we all thrive off that dopamine. And yeah, we are attached to our phones 24/7 and get that dopamine delivered to us. And not saying to throw those out and get a flip phone, but well, that may help. But the point of this presentation is really to figure out how to optimize and reduce your stress, because training stress is one thing, but we really can't quantify life stress in terms of, all right, is social media healthy for you? What stressors are going on at work? What stressors are going on with your family? And so by learning how to train it in accordance to your lifestyle, you don't have to struggle about, oh my gosh, so-and-so, my competition is doing this on Strava, so-and-so is doing this on Strava, or this pro athlete's doing this. Am I doing enough? You know, we really want to shed light on what you should be doing in accordance to your lifestyle. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Pablo and have him dive into the first point of our presentation.
Thank you, Coach, and hello, everybody. Yeah, and I think this is important also. This was like the first edition, to call it in a way, the first volume of this presentation came in the way of a blog 4 years ago, basically. And that's when I kind of made the jump to be one of the Toro coaches and was starting my professional career as an athlete. And so it's very fun to kind of revisit some of these points. Jason, I think we lost the presentation.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure no one was getting left out of the presentation. Just carry on. I'll pull it back up.
Okay, so yeah, and I think we sometimes tell athletes that we take care of the stress of training by, you know, giving you guys a plan or planning the workouts and so on, but it's not just that, it's how you interact with the plan. And I think this is part of this presentation is, yes, one thing is worrying what workouts you have to do this week or tomorrow and what the intervals are like, but it's also how you can relate with the whole thing and how that relates with you as an athlete and as a person. And I think that's kind of like the main aim of this presentation. And it's also a basic core value of the Toro philosophy. And basically when we talk to an athlete, we tell them that we want to fit training into their lives and not life into training, because I think we all as coaches have seen how many athletes basically become their training and become their sport. And yes, that's great. And it's awesome for a couple of weeks or months and even a couple of years. But then you look back and you might have, you know, steered away from many things that are also very important: family, friends, your work, your professional development, you know, and all those things have a place in life. And we don't like to talk about balance because that's an illusion, but we can, you know, we can juggle different things at different times. And that's part of what we kind of try to help people here at Toro is show them, yes, you can be a very high performing athlete, but you can also be a father, you can be a business owner, and we have the opportunity and the honor to have athletes in all different walks of life and at different stages of life. And I think I can talk for all the coaches that we have seen athletes, perform at very high levels in the sport, and also have very successful careers and be, you don't quantify, or at least I'm not a dad, so I cannot say people are great dads and great parents, but in general, dads and moms, but just, we have seen them grow beautiful families, and that's part of life. So I guess to dive into our first point, it's basically how to fit training into life, or what does it mean to fit training into life? And Jason, can you help me with the slide, please?
Yeah.
So I think the first point, and this probably sounds a bit like a self-help book, is communication and talk to your environment. And for you to be able to fit training into life, this is a team effort, and you need to have all the parts maybe not agreeing with each other, but understanding and in the same page. And that goes with your family, your friends, if they have a big impact in your life, and also your coach. And I think if you communicate with all the parts and you let them know, okay, these are my goals and this is what I want to do in the sport. First of all, you can discuss those goals, and I think that's the first point. And then also they can understand what's going on with your training, and it will be much easier to manage to do your workouts when you can do them, or also fit work and other life commitments around what your daily schedule looks like. And in this point, I think it's important to talk about setting sound goals. And the best example I have is when people sign up for an Ironman. An Ironman requires a commitment, a special level of commitment. There are, you're going to have days where you're going to be out on the bike for 5-6 hours, and then you might have to run off the bike. And that might not be every weekend, but you're going to have a couple of those weekends throughout an Ironman build. And so personally, as a coach, I like to tell my athletes, look, you want to sign up for an Ironman? Let's sit down with your partner and discuss this, because it's going to take a village, and it's going to take everybody understanding where you are. And yes, it might not be every weekend that you're going to have to be out for 6 hours, but there are going to be times where, as a coach, you also have to let the athlete know, okay, this is a priority right now, and we need this time. And that's important when the athlete can communicate, weeks in advance with their family and tell them, okay, you know what, in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to have to be on the bike for 6 hours. And we can plan around that. So the same way we can plan around other life events, we can plan around training when that's needed, but that shouldn't be your everyday. You shouldn't have to, plan around your 6-hour ride every weekend, because your family also requires time. And I think this also ties in with understanding what your limitations are and what your opportunities are. And I have great examples of athletes that easily tell me, you know what, the weekends are hard. I have family. I don't like to be away from them many hours, but I have an afternoon off on Wednesdays, so I can ride long on Wednesdays. And as a coach, that's part of our job, to figure out how that fits into your training schedule. But we can only reach that point if we communicate and you tell your coach, these are the times where I can play around and where I can fit, those different workouts that might be a little bit more demanding time-wise. And this also ties in with understanding that the main and basic goal of training is for you to be fit, healthy, and happy. It doesn't matter what time you do in a race. It doesn't matter what place you finish if you qualify for a world championship. If you're not fit, healthy, and happy, there is a disconnect on what we are doing between coach and athlete. And I think just understanding that, and understanding that we want to make you a better human, and that being the main goal of what we are doing, it's the basis to see training as part of your life and not your entire life. And finally, at this point, is just if what you're doing, the training that you're doing, is so demanding that you're not being able to fuel accordingly and recover accordingly and prevent injuries. I wrote first injury management and prevention, and not prevention and management. I say we have to prevent injuries and not just manage them. And if you're not being able to do these three things, then maybe something has to change. And maybe you're training, you cannot train, let's say you were training 14 hours. Okay, maybe we need to look back and see how we can accommodate those hours, because we need to be able to hit the basics. And once we hit those basics, we can think about increasing training. So it's not just train more hours, is how am I doing holistically?
Yeah, that's really good points, Pablo. And I think I would just add that, the fueling and recovery points, we've got a lot of tools at our disposal in terms of Whoop bracelets or Aura rings, things like that. But I don't think there's anything quite as beneficial as coach and athlete jumping on a call once a week, because we can, if we talk to our athlete weekly, we understand what they sound like when they're tired, if they've got a vocal fry, or they're just hoarse, or you can just tell that they're smoked. They may be muscling through the training and can just get it done because they're such type A driven athletes, but we're digging ourselves into, or we may be digging ourselves into a hole that come race week, you won't be able to dig out of. And we have to keep the big picture always in mind. Like, why are we doing this? We're not just exercising, we're training for an event, and the only event that matters is, well, the one that you pay probably a lot of money for. And so let's always keep that in mind. And an injury, experience and injury isn't always a load management issue. More oftentimes than not, it's fueling or lack of recovery. So keep that in mind. And yeah, and anything else you want to add there, Scott or Whitley, feel free to chime in as you feel.
No, I think you guys are, you're nailing it, doing a great job.
And thank you.
And just a quick plug, this is actually going to be what our next in-service is going to be on, as well as a lot of the recovery and injury prevention and load management in the off season.
I was going to add to that. Just wait for our next webinar. We are going to have Coach Scott and Nick Harding, our resident PT, I will say, jumping on a webinar in, I think, next week, right? And they're going to be talking a little bit more about strength and conditioning. And Jason, just to add the last part, there is also, we won't judge an athlete if we get a text message saying, I'm tired, I'm feeling tired. We're always happy to discuss what's going on and see what we need to adjust. And I say, don't be afraid to message your coach, and don't be afraid to communicate with your coach and say, hey, I'm feeling this. I need, I may need a day, I may need 2 days, and that's fine. I think nothing is set on stone in that case. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, about like life is not a spreadsheet, but just don't be afraid to send that text message, because it's part of that communication bracket, and just preventing getting to a point that we're going to touch on right now, which is getting to an empty tank. Yeah, so before we get to the empty tank, we wrote here, just you're not a 24/7 ATM, and I think we are used to seeing ATMs and we can get money and we can get cash anytime, but you are not available in the morning, at noon, and in the afternoon. Just because you think you have the free time and you have the time available in your schedule, that doesn't mean you can be training all the time. And that's where less might be more, because there might be times where you think you have the time in your schedule, but you're physically and mentally not there. You might be tired from work, or you're simply mentally not there. You might be physically, able, but mentally you might be just cooked. And so that is also a sign that you might not be able to fit 2 or 3 workouts in a day, and you might have to dial back to just 1, and that's fine. It's just how we can get the best out of that single workout, more than trying to fit 2 or 3 workouts in a day that are going to leave us very empty. And then the next point is just, when you do those workouts, be very mindful that you are not getting to the empty every single time and emptying your tank every single time. And with that is that sometimes we see athletes, and as athletes, I think we all have been, I don't want to say guilty, but we all have experienced the fact that you get to that last repetition, the last interval of a workout, and you really have to dig for it. And yes, there are times in training and there are times in racing, especially in racing, I would say, where you're going to have to get to that point. But I would say that very rarely in training, you should get to that point. You should get to the point where you really empty your tank and where you have nothing left after that last interval. If you are doing that, then again, we go back to what we just talked before. There is something that is not connected, and there is a disconnect between what your coach is seeing and what you're maybe telling your coach, and also some of the things that you might be doing as an athlete to prepare for those workouts. And so that's why I always say, you're not going to get extra credit in training. I will never tell an athlete good job for emptying the tank in training. I don't see the value on that. There is not a value of training yourself mentally by going to empty every single time. And then there is also no value by having everything in green in training peaks if that's leaving you empty. And that's why we say, okay, shoot for 9 out of 10. If that means that there might be a workout that you are not able to finish fully, that's okay. It's a workout. That workout is not going to change the end result, and it's not going to make you less of an athlete. It's just a workout in a big picture, in a big plan, and so that is fine. But also be very mindful of that extra hour. If you constantly try to hit an extra hour, an extra mile in your run, an extra hour on the bike, that's probably not very smart if you are not maybe fueling and recovering for that, and you are not being very active in the conversation with your coach about why you're doing that, and if that fits part of the big picture. And the last point here is just about fueling, and I think that's the only place where less is more doesn't apply. And we're probably going to have multiple talks about this. We have a great partner in fueling that helps us with fueling, and they are going to be the first ones to tell you that less is not more in fueling. Eating less is probably not going to help us at the end of the day, and you are not going to help yourself as an athlete by limiting your intake of calories constantly. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. And we're not going to dive into that right now completely, but just be very mindful that when we say less is more, that doesn't apply for fueling. And I just wanted to make that remark here, because I know that it can sound good for some people, and it's just don't put yourself in a hard place, and don't put yourself in a place where your body doesn't have the fuel to be able to handle the work.
Great. Yeah. And I think the biggest take home point for me as a coach and athlete is, we have to think throughout an entire season of training. So by exceeding the prescribed pace, heart rate, power output, you can get away with it by doing it a few weeks at a time. But if you're constantly, if the prescribed pace, let's say, is 4 minutes per K for an interval, and you do 3:45s because you felt good, great. I mean, you're likely taking away from tomorrow's training. So there's always a point to the specific workout, and on that, the race day type of efforts that Pablo touched on, think of it as like a box of matches or a matchbook. Like, you've got a finite amount of those efforts. Honestly, in your athletic career, those see God moments, as Steve Magnus calls them, you don't have many in your athletic career. So why waste them in training? It's not worth it. And we'll get into Strava in a second, but it's not worth it for a digital crown. Trust me. Save that for the real trophies, and save those efforts for when it really counts.
And I think as triathletes especially, we have been very used to doing a lot of racing, for example, and you see athletes race 6-7 half Ironmans in a year. I've done that, and you forget how hard it is to really empty your tank. And you start, yes, you probably can race well, and you can have decent performances. You can showcase some of the training in the racing that you do, but it's very hard for you to empty the tank in all those 7 times. And you start wondering why, and it might be a little too much.
Perfect.
The next point. Jason, I think you want to lead this?
Yeah, this is a tough one to kind of convey to I would say a novice athlete or a newer athlete who is just introduced to endurance sports as a whole, because going back to what we said when this presentation began, we live in a dopamine, instantaneous dopamine kind of world, where instant gratification, boom, boom, boom. I want it now. I want it now. I want to go 9 hours in an Ironman now. I want to qualify for world champs now, and it just doesn't happen in endurance sports. You know, these adaptations can take years upon years, maybe a decade, and that's also what makes it so fulfilling and rewarding when we do hit these goals. But yeah, the best way that I can describe it is just it's a slow burn. You know, the athletes who try to peak too early, you won't see them in 3 years, nor will they enjoy what they're doing. You know, to truly find joy in the sport of triathlon, or any endurance sports for that matter, is to really just trust the process. You know, buy into what your coach, whether that's a coach on this call or a coach on another call, buy into their multi-year vision, and know that when your key race for the year is over, your athletic life isn't over. So, you know, we want to think long-term and just progress year to year to year. Doesn't mean you need to do the same events every year, but you need to find growth in yourself as an athlete and a person, ideally in all 3 disciplines. But more importantly, I would argue, you know, your mindset, because we want the skills that we help you develop in training and racing to just, as Pablo said, make you a better human. You know, I feel like if you can endure the obstacles and the shortcomings that we experience as endurance athletes, shit, dealing with trouble at work should be a piece of cake, you know, in my opinion. I mean, that's really my mindset as a coach is we want our training to just make you more enlightened and just better humans. But I'll let Pablo talk on this a little bit more, just because he's been in the sport for an extremely long time. And what's even more impressive is that he got into it at such a young age. I mean, at 18 years old, he was, you know, training 20 plus hours a week and was just extremely disciplined. And I would love to hear his take on how that long-term mindset was really ingrained at him at a young age, because he didn't grow up in triathlon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it also goes hand in hand with just understanding how your passion changes. Because when you think long term, and you think that when we tell an athlete to think long term, we're also telling them to dial, to see their passion in a different color. Because sometimes when we are so passionate for something, we want things now, and you know, we want to get to, and it happened to me. You know, I was lucky to get to my first 70.3 World Championship when I was just 18. But looking back, was that the best decision? Probably not. At that point, it was, and that was the decision that we made to go there. But it was probably very fueled for passion, and it forced a development that could have been made in a very different way. But that's, you know, I have been very lucky that I have had a support system that has helped me to mold my passion as I've grown as a person as well. And I think also a good realization is that deadlines doesn't exist in sports. You know, I think Jason and I, we were working together as a coach and athlete when we set the goal to become a pro. And you know what, the first year it didn't happen, and it simply didn't happen because of maybe I wasn't ready for it. And when it happened, it happened. And I think just understanding that those deadlines are just an illusion. And even when you are at the highest level, you start thinking more about the process, and you forget about that specific goal that you set, that is just that you see as finite. And so I think that's when we say be aware of deadlines, is also understanding that that goal that you have, that like sub 3 hour marathon that you want to reach, yeah, it's fair, but look at the process to get there. And that's going to take away the need and just the hurry to get there as soon as possible. Because otherwise you're just going to be frustrated every time you do a marathon and you are, you know, a couple minutes off, because you're just going to be like, okay, well, my goal is to be under 3 hours. And again, we support that goal, and we're there, and we want to make sure that you get there as an athlete. But that's not the main objective of the training. It's just that process to get there. What's going to really mold the training and what's going to change the things. And that goes hand in hand with also understanding that the process and that long-term vision is going to have times where things are going to go wrong, maybe, or they're going to take a turn that is unexpected. Results, training sessions, injuries, whatever you want to call it. And you're going to have to I wrote it here, sweep good and bad things under the rug, understand that that's part of that process, and you're going to have to work through those things in that multi-year vision. And even if that means, pushing a goal out 2 years, or pushing that event that you had out 2 years, because maybe at that specific time is not the right thing for you. And so I think that just understanding that is going to help to reduce the stress of that need of finishing things right away. Okay, the next one is consistency over epicness. And we have talked about this in social media posts. We have shared these throughout different blogs. And we always talk about how we want athletes to just do consistent work and not epic work. And I think the first point here, Jason, is right, like, think about what's your specific process. And right now we are inundated with so much, we're flooded with information in social media and YouTube and whatever channel you look at, of this athlete that is doing an epic workout, or the Norwegians, how they train, day after day, week after week, and they're doing this incredible load of work. But that's not your reality. That's not your process. And I think understanding that, and understanding that social media at the end of the day is just a highlight reel, is a great example. And what it's funny is that some of those people are the first one to talk about how social media and what they put out is just, a highlight reel. And I remember Christian Blumenfeld, the Olympic champion, saying, people forget that I've been working on this for 10 years. And we go back to the multi-year vision, right? He's doing epic work for most humans, but that's consistent work for him, because he has been doing it for so many years, and he has been putting in so many hours of work throughout the different years, that right now what seems epic for most of us is just consistent work for him. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because training is just, and I put the Legos here, and we're going to go back to Strava in a second with Jason, but the Legos are just like these little pieces that are going to build, that big, massive building at the end of the day. And it's not just like one big piece, it's just the tiny little pieces. And when you see those little pieces, you stop worrying so much about making that Saturday workout this really epic day that is just gonna, you're gonna post on social media and have on Strava and get all the kudos, and everybody's gonna be behind you. And you start realizing, okay, maybe that day is gonna make me very tired, and I'm gonna have to recover for 2, 3, 4, 5 days after that, and I'm not gonna be able to train hard again until the next weekend. And you realize, okay, I can do a 2-hour day. It's a shorter day. It might not be as fancy. It might not get so many kudos, but you're gonna be able to replicate that day throughout the entire next week, or throughout the entire next building block, or throughout the entire next year of training. And I think understanding that and seeing that is going to help us make decisions in training. Yes, those decisions are going to be made by your coach, but you also are going to communicate. And this is, and we talk about a collaborating relationship with our athletes. It's just part of that, If you maybe want to do that epic run that you have dreamt with, talk with your coach, see how that can fit into the schedule, but don't just do it for the sake of doing it, because it's going to have an impact, and that impact is going to can affect, and is going to have an effect on the future work that is planned. And lastly, before we talk about the Strava part, is that you also should develop a flexible mindset, and understanding that life is not a spreadsheet. And with this, it's just, yes, things are going to have to change. And when we set up the plan, it's not set in stone, and it's always expected that we can change things, and that we're going to have to change things, because things arise, and life things show up. And when we realize that, we stop forcing so much about getting these big, massive workouts of big training days just for the sake of doing them, and we can start playing with them around our actual life schedule to make it a much more sound strategy. And going back to Strava, I just want to, and I asked Jason for permission, but I think Jason is an athlete, experience what Strava is like, because at some point he was the king of Strava. He was chasing KOMs, he was helping me chase KOMs, and it was all fun. But you also realize that you probably start changing a little bit things in your training to, feed it to Strava. And so, Jason, can you talk a little bit about how you think Strava maybe changes the way we see training or how we perform in training?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk just personally on it. In my Strava, it sounds like I'm at Alcoholics Anonymous or something. My Strava addiction peaked during COVID because there was no racing, so you could make every training, you could easily negotiate with yourself. Why would I adhere to this training protocol? Like, this is way more fun. There's no races on the calendar. Like, this is the race. And it can become very addicting to just chase segments or blow a particular interval out of the water because you're on a 400-yard stretch in your neighborhood. It's like freaking ridiculous when you take a step back and look at it, right? But it can also add some joy to your training. You can discover new routes, new places. But I think the underlying issue that I got carried away with was just the knowing that people were watching what I was doing and feeling like I had to impress people, which is ridiculous. It's absurd. Knowing that when I went for a run, it had to be, I couldn't let a mile be under or over a certain pace, which is silly. And I should know better as a coach and of course as an athlete, but it's easy to get carried away when there is no real target on the radar. And I do think some of that fatigue really carried over into the season where I could race, and that I burned some of those race day matches that, I mentioned. We have a finite amount as athletes, especially as I approach 40. It's like you just can't go that deep very frequently. And I was doing it way too much. And I think I see a lot of athletes doing it just for that validation on their Strava feed. And look, I'm not anti-Strava, I still use it, but I'm taking the mindset of post and ghost. I'm not commenting. I don't want to sound like a narcissist, but if someone comments, I'm not going to comment back. I don't want to feed into that. I like it. I still want to know like how the ride was in relation to some other rides I've done in the past, but I don't want to give in to getting into the wormhole of comparing myself, because I look at workouts all freaking day. I don't need to look at workouts for fun. But yeah, that's just my personal story with Strava.
I would also like to for Strava Anonymous.
Yeah.
I took 6 months off Strava because it was causing anxiety, because I was rebuilding my fitness and I was constantly comparing myself to what I was and the other people I used to train with and race with. I just got back on this week after a 6-month hiatus. So if you feel like it's stressing you, I would just recommend just take a step back.
Yeah. Or make it private. I think it's really cool that some of the best athletes on the planet share their training. But some athletes don't. And that's okay too. So I would just end it with like, Strava is fun and keep it that way. Moderation is everything. But I don't want Strava to be the last thing you look at before you fall asleep. I don't think you should look at your phone before you fall asleep anyway, like pick up a book or do something else. But if Strava and comparing yourself to others is the last thing you look at before you fall asleep as an athlete, you're going to sleep like shit. I guarantee it. So don't do that.
And I guess it's just, we are not hating on all these things. We're not hating on social media. It's just try to develop and work on developing a little bit more healthy relationship with all of these things, and understand as well that in Strava and things like that, you don't know what people are posting. You don't know if people are posting half of their workouts. You have no idea what is behind people's lives and behind people's feeds on social media, and that includes Strava. So just be very careful with the comparisons you make with others, and also just how you interact in that sense, and what value you put on yourself as well, with all what's going on in social media in general. So I think it's just not a hate. We are not hating on that. We are users of social media, but it's just develop a little bit more of a sound relationship with it overall.
Perfect.
And lastly, but not least, of course, as they say, stress plus recovery equals adaptations. And that's, that equation, it's very important to keep in mind, because as we talked before, you can stress your body as much as you want with training. You can train the house down. But if the stress in life is just not allowing you to recover accordingly, those adaptations are just simply not going to happen. And here I will go back to a story that we wrote in that blog 4 years ago. And it's the story I shared, and Jason and I shared back then. And it was, I was in grad school at that time. I was working part-time at school, working part-time outside school to, help myself financially, trying to train to become a professional athlete, and going to grad school. And we started realizing that at some point I was getting very, very sick. And one of the first questions that Jason asked me was, how much are you sleeping? And we realized that I was barely sleeping 6 hours a night, or just some nights were less than 6 hours. I was lucky if I got an 8-hour night sleep once a week. And at that time, I simply needed more rest. And so we ended up tweaking my schedule a little bit. I ended up doing some workouts in the afternoons where I had more time, or just, at noon, even if that meant jumping on a treadmill more frequently in the summer in Texas. But it was the best way for me to, be able to rest and recover and adapt from that training. I was actually getting sick. So I wasn't, not only I was not adapting, I was also affecting my health and just not being able to get the full advantage of the training that I was doing. So you're basically, I'm not going to say you're wasting your time, because that's not fair, but you're just simply not doing things in the most efficient way. And that ties in with something that we see a lot in our athletes is sometimes resting is hard, and people have a hard time trusting to rest. Because yes, when you rest, you probably are going to feel that you're not making the improvements that you should be doing. And there is this old say in sports that when you're resting, your biggest rivals are training, and that's simply not true. Like, they are going to have to rest at some point. And if they don't, they're probably not going to adapt. And as we said before, what matters is your process. So if in your process you're not being able to adapt from that training, sorry, it's just not gonna end. It's just not gonna end where you probably want, I guess. And it's important to be able to trust yourself in those times. And for example, when the season ends or after a big event, just take the time to recover and allow yourself to, bounce back, to focus on other areas of your life that you maybe cannot focus as much when you are preparing for a big race. And have the trust that when you come back, you're going to be fueled with energy, you're going to be happy, and you're going to have a fire in your belly to continue chasing the journey, which I think sometimes people lose sight of, and they lose the perspective of what the main goal is. And it's, again, being fit, being healthy, and being happy. And so if you see that maybe you're not reaching those things, take the time to rest and allow yourself to rest, and be okay with that rest, because otherwise you're going to take the time to rest, but when you come back to training, you're going to realize you're as tired as you were before because you were so stressed out during the rest. And so give yourself that space to recover and to regenerate. And yeah, I don't know if one of our coaches wants to add something else on this.
Pretty good way to wrap it up. I think I would just end with saying have full confidence in your own process. What works for one of your biggest rivals isn't going to work for you. Just like their fueling plan isn't going to work for you, their training stimulus is likely not going to work for you. So have confidence in the process and know that this process is a multi-year process, and just enjoy it. We want you to do this for a decade plus, whether that's with Toro or somewhere else. Like, this is the greatest sport there is, because there's always an opportunity for continual improvement. And yeah, any questions, just drop them below. Otherwise, we'll make sure we post this recording to Discord tomorrow.
Yep.
Any questions? Beauty. Okay.
Thank
well,
you,
yeah.
guys.
Thanks everybody for jumping on, and stay tuned. If you're not on the Discord channel, just reach out to one of myself, Pablo, Scott, or Whitley, and we'll make sure you're on the Discord channel. Again, that's where we're doing all of our communication, no longer on Facebook. But you don't want to miss next week's webinar with Coach Scott and Nick. I'm fortunate to coach them both, and they both are incredible physical therapists, and they're going to give us a really unique uniquely shaped presentation to our athletes on how to stay strong, really improve upon your foundation, and really just stay healthy. And any other teasers you want to add to that, Scott?
I'm not sure if Nick's on.
I don't think he is.
But for those of you guys that also saw that Nick had posted out on the Discord was about his strength training program specifically for our triathletes in the off season. And so we're going to touch on that as well from a injury screening, injury prevention standpoint, but also what we can do as athletes to really address any dysfunction, any imbalances, and really try to get some of that stuff that's kind of lost in the cracks in off season to really help just speed up all of your recoveries, as well as just get more bang for your buck on your overall performance as an athlete and just overall fitness and strength, just to make you the best you can without having to sacrifice any injury risks at the same time.
Perfect. Okay, guys. Well, have a great start to your week tomorrow, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Reach out if you have any questions. Bye-bye. Good job, Jason.